cuts through the haze, confronts the darkness in these end times days. A single match struck against the fear, hope ignites, drawing redemption near. Can you feel the tremble in the ground, a buried heartbeat making sound?
Across the panorama, this dead awaken, change begins from broken places, hope unpins.
Yeah, we all live in dead America. One healing spark starts the fire, burning brighter, taking higher.
Today we're speaking with Steve Ward. He is from Steps Ministries. And please, could you introduce yourself, Steve, and let people know just a little more about you, please?
I'd be glad to, Ed. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here. Again, as Ed mentioned, I'm Steve Ward. I'm a husband of a year or two behind Ed. We're coming up on 39 years. I have two sons who are now young adults in their early 30s. I was in the business world for 38 years. For a part of that time, I was a highly functioning alcoholic. I had a lot of substance problems in my family. And 8 years ago, I felt led to leave the business world to start a nonprofit ministry. So that's the short version.
Highly functioning alcoholic. I love that term because, I really resonate. That resonates well with me because I was a bad alcoholic, drug addict. And I would do these things at work. I would do them wherever I went. And I felt normal. I thought everybody else was kind of goofy. And I functioned well. And I got through life. But boy, the tragedies that I witnessed because of people and places and things, it's a lot to deal with. And that's kind of why I was into drugs and alcohol. What was your reason?
I started drinking when I was 15. I think my reasons changed over time a little bit, but we all do what we do for a reason, right? And the best I can figure out by looking backwards is, I was comfortable in one identity and that I was good in school, but there was another identity I wanted, right? I wanted to be part of the cool crowd and for all the girls to like me, right? So I would go into these situations and these parties and feel slightly uncomfortable, like I was acting, like I was playing a part. And I found that alcohol helped me not feel that way anymore. Probably made me act a stupider part, but that said, it made me feel better. So it worked. And at that age, actually it was fun. I enjoyed it. As I went through high school and then college and got out into the business world, I carried that habit with me because that's what we do, right? We figure out ways to live life as we grow up, whether we're conscious of it or not. We do. And then we very often may carry those for decades. So I got out in the work world and I was pretty responsible at work, right? But I would come home and I tend to be an overthinker. So I wanted to turn my brain off for a while. And I had a go-to mechanism that helped me do that. So, by the way, now I use the term high-functioning alcoholic not to imply that I was less than one, because I was. Alcohol was more in control of me than I was of it. But I didn't use that term. And I would go to a lot of people, right, who don't know what they don't know and are going through life thinking everything's great. And I'd say I was an alcoholic, and they would smile politely and instantly internally categorize me as one of those other people. So I finally started using the term high functioning alcoholic. Well, I guess it was true, right? I did do well at work. I was, a pretty good husband and a dad, but that didn't mean I wasn't an alcoholic. I was. But I started using that term, and I noticed that people adjusted how they heard and responded to what I said. Especially like, business people or, people who are doing well and they think they have life knocked, right? I'd say high functioning alcoholic, and all of a sudden they go, huh. What's that? And are you saying that if you go to work, you could still be an alcoholic? And how do you know when you are one? In other words, it changed the conversation a little bit because yeah, I kind of believe that we're all addicted to something and we all have issues to work with. And frankly, I think we all need recovery, and that's part of our message. And so, actually, using the term high functioning alcoholic is meant to open up conversations about it.
And it does, because it is one of those unrecognizable terms that sparks interest. And that's what we need on this subject is we need interest on the subject. We all, well, maybe not all of us have experienced the 12-step program and AA. I started at Alateen. At 13 years old, my uncle got me involved in Alateen, and I'm glad he did, because I was witnessing this life of it's normal to be an alcoholic, drug addict, or chase whatever uh, addiction that you may be chasing at the time. And there's a term that you also use, compulsive issues. And this is very important for people to recognize that compulsion is not just over drugs and alcohol, it's over every aspect of our life. Would you get into explaining what those are for people?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. We coined a term that allows us to have this conversation with people in a, I'd say, kind of organized way. It's an acronym. It's called CHAINS, CHAINS, right? Which is meaningful, right? We all have chains that hold us back and keep us from being meeting our full potential and living life the way it should be. But CHAINS is also an acronym. The CH stands for compulsive habits. The A and the I stands for addictions and idols. And so from a spiritual sense, there's this concept of idols, which actually strongly overlaps what we think of as addictions. And then the NS is for negative self-talk, because addiction and most of our problems start in the mind. They start in, how thoughts present themselves into our mind, and do we recognize them? Are we aware of them? Are we able to manage them, or do they control us? So it is a spectrum. When we do something compulsively, that just means we're not intentionally and thoughtfully and proactively making a good choice about it. It just happens. And very often, a lot of the way that we either react compulsively or impulsively, meaning in the moment, we don't even stop, and emotionally, right? We react to our emotions. But we can learn to adjust that. Once we recognize that, there are simple methodologies we can use to change how we think. So it all starts there. And I think of change as a spectrum, right? And we're all on it somewhere. We all have negative thinking that bothers us. In many cases, that becomes compulsive, right? These thought patterns repeat themselves, and they start to have negative consequences that over time become addictions. So it's the case. And the other thing you mentioned is 12 steps. I love the 12 steps. In fact, the first book I wrote when I was in recovery, because I was in recovery for myself and as a husband and as a dad. And so I was exposed to the 12 steps, and I thought, this is some of the wisest, most practical stuff I've ever seen. And, the question I ask myself is, where did people learn how to live life, normally? And the answer is they don't. They make it up. So the first book wasn't really about addiction and, recovery per se. It was about how do you live life better. But it took the 12 steps and it simplified and condensed them into things that, regular people who haven't even been exposed to recovery can understand and put into practice every day.
Yeah, I found the AA to be a stepping stone for myself. It gave me the experience that I'm not alone in my experiences. And that gave me the ability to start talking. And I've never been a talker. I've always been shut up, just drown my own sorrows in my privacy. And that really is a shame when we think about it, because expression is who we are as human beings. We want to express our needs, our wants, our feelings. And if we can't express them, like you just said, we act on them, and we allow our feelings to get in the way. And that's really an immaturity, because for some reason we were not given, or we didn't take the responsibility to become that next step in our life. So the best thing about that program is where people come together and actually talk about who they are, what they've experienced, what they came out to be, and opening up and letting people know that it's okay to be you where you are at that particular moment in time. That's really important, if you think about it, is it not?
Yeah, it is. And you're describing a lot of the attributes that are common in the world of recovery, and most people may not have been exposed to recovery. They may not know what it is, and if they're struggling, they're very hesitant or downright, against going to a recovery meeting because they have a misunderstanding about it. Right? They think, oh, it's a bunch of strange people who, got massive issues. I'm nothing like them. They're going to embarrass me and put me on the spot, and then they're going to tell me all the bad things I'm doing. That's the opposite of recovery, right? Recovery, the normal person in recovery is someone who has struggled, right, in the past. But by going through recovery, they've learned humility. They've learned empathy. They've learned self-awareness. They've learned personal development. They've learned how to get more in touch with things that will move them in the right direction emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially. And people generally come out of it, socially just more empathetic and more caring, more service oriented. And so, recovery meetings are awesome. Anyone who's out there wondering if they should go to one for themselves or someone that they love, I would suggest go give 2 or 3 a try. And I think you may be surprised, because they can be a very attractive, invigorating, non-threatening environment where you can learn a lot about living life better.
The very interesting thing I found about these programs, Steve, is that when you walk in, you get a shock because it's culturally different, because you're, as an average person, walking into a room and you might see a lawyer, a doctor, or you never know, a priest, so there's all walks of life inside an AA room. And when you go into the meeting hall, it's a serious thing. It's about your recovery. It's not about judging people. And that's what I thought when I was wanting to go, is, oh, they're going to judge me. There's this thing in the back of an addict's mind that people are going to judge you. What's the hardest thing about that judgment thing always in the back of our mind?
Yeah. In fact, I'll use an example that I sometimes use in talks, right? I'll say, envision 2 situations, right? One situation is 2 people come together and they say, hi, 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 and one says to the other one, how are you doing? And the other one probably says, fine. And the other one politely goes on their way. Or maybe wonder if the second one slips up and actually says something like, well, actually, I've myself or my spouse or one of my kids is struggling, and I think there's a drug problem in the family. In a normal situation, what do people do? They don't know what to do, so they weirdly smile and start to back away and say, well, I'm so sorry about that. And if they're in the lobby of a church, maybe they say, but I'll pray for you. Gotta go. Now imagine another situation, right, where 2 people come together, they say hi, and one says, how you doing, to the other one? And that person says, oh man, I'm really struggling this week. I'm trying to stop drinking, but it's hard. I relapsed on Tuesday, and I'm trying to get back. And the other person rather than retreating in fear or hesitation, moves toward that person and leans in and empathetically says, "Oh man, I'm sorry to hear that. So, how are you really feeling?" In other words, they lean into the conversation because they really care, and they're not uncomfortable with going there, with having a real conversation, and they aren't in a hurry to leave. They're there. They're not trying to fix or scold or teach or lecture the other person. They're trying to listen and support them and be there for them. You know, and that's what recovery is like, right? And in real life, in all of its different environments, whether it's at work or unfortunately at church or in normal life, very often it's the former. So recovery is pretty cool.
Yeah, and you do meet a lot of great, interesting people that can actually help you advance your life in many ways. So don't be afraid to reach out. I want to step into the higher power, because we all need to look upon a higher power to be successful in life. I really, truly believe that. And for every one of us, it's different, but there's got to be some sort of a higher power that we can reach towards for that guidance or just help along the way. What is your experience with your higher power?
Yeah. Well, whether people have recognized it or not, right? We all are spiritual beings, right? We are designed so that what you would think of as our wellness is emotional wellness and mental and social and spirit and intersocial, but it's also spiritual. And for people who aren't very far along a spiritual journey, with those, I'll just say, have you considered the notion that there's something out there bigger than you, right? And innately, people know that to be true, right? Wherever they are, either they're they know there's something out there bigger than them. They may label it in a different way, and and then I'll urge them to go on, what I call a search for the truth. I would say have an open mind and an open heart, and keep following those questions. Things like, what's the meaning of life? Do I have a purpose? What is my identity? What am I meant to do? How am I supposed to interact with other people? And when you ask those big questions, it leads you closer and closer to the conclusion that there's something out there, and I know I was in my late 30s, right, where I was a relatively secular person, right? I didn't have anything against God. I just didn't think about him very much, and I'd been trained as an engineer. I was working with IBM. I was in the business world. And so I was a pretty nice guy, but I just didn't think about God very much. But all of a sudden, now we had a young family, and I started thinking, wow, sometimes people with families take their kids to church. I wonder if we ought to consider that notion. And then I went down this path of saying, it's one of the biggest questions, perhaps the biggest question in our existence is there a God? And if there is, what is that God like? Right. So I said, I'm going to go investigate that. And for a period of time, a year and a half, I just read dozens and dozens of books to try to understand that. And for me, the answer became absolutely clear and logical and obvious that there is a God. And I think it's the God of the Bible, right? That is who God is. But wherever people are, I would say, keep asking deep questions. Understand that you may come in with preconceptions, but set those aside. Search for the truth. And I think over time, most people will recognize, wow, there is a higher power. And the further they go on that, to understand that there is a God who created them and who loves them and has good plans for them, that's the most encouraging thing you could ever learn. So it's really helpful for living life, but also in the world of recovery. But wherever people are, whether they're in recovery or not, you have to understand that you are a spiritual being, whether you think so or not. And there are big things out there, and it's worth taking the time to go learn about them.
That's right. And it will take you on a fascinating journey, because what sometimes is present in your life is not reality. And when you actually bump into the wall of reality and you can actually place tangible things with historical fact, that really shows you, wow, there's something to this. Now, myself, I've been spiritual all my life. I just didn't really act upon it until, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then I started really seeking. And boy, did I find there's fascinating things I've experienced, spiritual things that can't be explained through our physical matter, but I know what it is. So I expect myself to understand that, not other people. And what I can tell you is God is about love. And a lot of what we experience today in the church might not seem to be love, but I want to tiptoe here a little bit because I don't want to offend anyone, but there is this hurt in the church. There's a hurt in our world, and it centers around love and compassion, and guidance is a big part of that. And if you're a pastor, you have to be upright and you have to be forward with your congregation. And a lot of the times there's prosperity gospel preached, and I'm into prosperity. I love anyone that, can be better and become better. But a lot of that is when you become better at giving and reaching out to others, and you expand what you do because of the wealth that you receive. And sometimes we don't witness that. On the television, you see these televangelists, and they over exaggerate sometimes, and that really diminishes what Christ is, that love, that compassion. Have you stopped and just said hello to a person that's homeless on the streets today? Or did you look the other way and think, oh, why is he that way? Or did you even have that thought? There's so much of this hate wrapped up in what's supposed to be love in our world. And I think it's important that we address these things so other people can see that everyone involved in church is not hypocritical, and we do care about you.
Yeah, but there are several different spheres of this conversation that sometimes people tend to lump them together, right? The concept of spirituality means that you're open to the concept that there's something bigger than you, and that when you investigate that, there's probably some form of higher power, and that takes different people in different directions. Then there's the concept of, Christianity introduces us to what the higher power is like, and the best way to know what God is like is to go read how Jesus lived, right? So you have that concept then of having a personal relationship with a higher power, with God, one who loves us. And then there's an overlay on that, which is the concept of religion. And on top of that, the concept of different denominations, right? And religions and denominations are created by people, right? And people are flawed, which means most denominations are by definition created and run by a bunch of flawed people. That doesn't make them wrong. It just means very often if you run into someone who's coming out of a church and they're hypocritical or they're judgmental, that doesn't represent the church. It doesn't even represent religion. It certainly doesn't represent Christianity, right? I mean, Christianity is a very loving, grace-oriented approach. But in any institution, any company or club or denomination, there are flawed people. So don't judge the big picture of who God is and what God is like by a few individuals you've run into, right? Just understand that, hey, we've all got our struggles, and keep on your journey, but keep an open mind. Look into who God is. And by the way, anyone who's on this journey, if you want to take a confidential guided journey on it, we have some resources at lifeimprovementsteps.com/spiritual growth. It's lifeimprovementsteps.com/spiritual growth. That's a confidential, from your phone or your laptop, attractive, non-judgmental journey to help you ask bigger questions and go down a path to learn what God is like and what that means in your life. So.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So, another big issue is you mentioned it earlier, being that cool kid. Gotta, polish us instead of what we should be. And that's putting the shine on our Lord, our Savior, Christ. And a lot of the times that cool kid ends up feeling very lonely and alone deep inside, and it turns into depression. And that's when we turn to drugs and alcohol and other substances to make our self feel better. But there is an emptiness without the love of Christ inside of us. And some people may not even have heard about Jesus yet. And when they hear something that sparks interest, how do we point them to a place that can actually be beneficial? And if that place is a ministry or a building, which often it is, how do we tell them that you have to be inside the Word and not inside the building? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good. In fact, that's part of a thought process I'm on this week, because in a couple of days I'll be teaching another in a series of classes in a workforce development program. And so the people in this program are young adults who come out of periods of unemployment. And they could be coming out of recovery or incarceration, or some cases even homelessness, or maybe they just haven't been able to get the jobs they want. But they're probably mostly secular. Some of them do have a faith journey. And so I'll be talking about, how do you prevent addictions and bad habits by taking steps in the right direction. But part of that story has to be the spiritual component, right? So with that level, right, I'm just trying to help them know that there is something out there, right? There is a God out there. And then to introduce them to that God, because a lot of people have never met him. But when people find out that they are designed by a God who loves them and cares for them, and that each of them is designed special with their own strength. A lot of people don't think that they have much going for them. They do. Everyone has their own talents with which they've been given, and there are things that they can do, and that God has good plans for them, not just collectively, but individually. Right? When people learn that, wow, you mean my life has meaning, and that I have a purpose, and that my identity is not what my background is or what my parents or my friends have told me, that's life changing. Literally, that's a massive transformation, and it's incredibly freeing, right? To let go of, I don't have to get through life all on my own, right? I've got to be perfect. I've got to do everything on my own. I've got to control every situation. I've got to control people. No, I've got to be the best me I can be, and keep taking steps in the right direction. And I know that there's a God who's there rooting for me and guiding me and walking with me along the way. That's just a life-changing revelation for a lot of people,
Yeah, I like that a lot. Being our authentic self and being who we are is the most important thing, because you can't hide that from our maker. He knows where you are. And when we actually relieve ourselves from our stubbornness, we actually find it's okay to mess up and stumble and fall, because when we are doing that and we can't walk for ourselves, like the poem Footprints, there's one set of footprints in the sand when he's carrying you. When you're walking on your own, you see two footprints. He's there with you at all times. We just don't recognize it, or we blindly don't want to. And it's a choice. So, Steve, tell us about your ministry and how it helps people, because I see that it helps children, it helps people, it helps businesses. So you're into everything. Tell us about how you created it, why you created it, and what it does for people.
Yeah, I describe it a little bit differently. I'm into one big thing that affects everybody. In other words, where it came from, right? I mentioned that I was in recovery for myself and as a husband and as a dad. And I was fascinated by the world of recovery, right? And over a period of time, I had these epiphanies. The first was, well, we're all addicted to something, right? We all have issues, right? The second was, well, I'll be darned. The things that can drag our life down are actually not only treatable, but in many cases, they're preventable. And the third epiphany was, the way you prevent them is learning how to live life better. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, socially. That's what life is all about. So again, I was still working full time at that, but I was so fascinated by that led to my first book. And then I enjoyed that process of trying to understand what I believe have been, truths that have worked out and been proven over decades, in many cases centuries, right? Try to help people understand them and put them into terms that are very easy to understand and put into use, right? So what Steps basically does is we do the work for you to study worlds like spirituality, recovery, neuroscience, psychology, wellness, personal development, and pick those things that have been proven to work for a lot of people over a long period of time and make them easy to understand and put into practice on a practical basis. In fact, that's what we do. And then we offer information for parents, especially parents of teenagers, but parents of preteens and parents of kids. We offer information for teenagers themselves so that they can learn how to live life better. I mentioned that most people make it up as they go along, but wonder if you actually walk them through. Here are some practical life skills you can use to live life better. It's incredible. We work with a lot of organizations, whether they be companies or nonprofits or churches. We try to multiply what we do. We create resources and online education that we share through other organizations to help their people, and that people can find directly themselves at lifeimprovementsteps.com. So our goals are to help people improve their lives, grow closer to God in the process, and prevent behavioral health issues like substance abuse and mental health. And I think we can do all those things at the same time, right? We can learn to live life better and walk along this attractive, winsome journey toward getting to know that God is out there. And the better we live, the less self-inflicted harm we will have. I mean, we will still have trials in our life, right? There is no instant prosperity, as you mentioned, right? We will still make mistakes. We will still have troubles, but life in general will get better. And, it's when you get along that journey, there's so many things that just make you feel not confined by a religion, but freed to be who you were designed to be. I mean, when you actually think, wow, I'm supposed to be who I am. I am designed special. I have value. And now I'm just going to try to be the best me that I can be. And I'm going to walk, in companionship with others who are on the same journey. What a relief that is. You mean, I don't really have to try to control all my outcomes and circumstances and other people? No, you don't, because you can't do it anyway. It's, and the people I'm most empathetic toward, because I used to be one of them, are all those people out there who don't know what they don't know, right? They're running through life thinking, well, life is, working 55 or 60 hours a week so that I can be recognized for being great at what I do and making the most money. And I'm living, what Thoreau would say is a life of quiet desperation. Anxiety is a daily companion. I have some buddies that, maybe I play golf or hunt with, but I don't really have any close people that I can be real and vulnerable with. I put on this act every day to act like I've got it all together and I'm confident, but inside I feel like I'm not. I feel like I'm an imposter. I want to feel good about the future, but I don't know where the future is going. That's not the exception. That's the norm, right? So that's kind of what most people are going through. But on the outside, they act like everything's great, and if you ask them how they're doing, they'll say fine. They'll say fine. But inside, we're all struggling with something, right? We're all on a similar journey.
That's right. That's what makes up Dead America. That's actually the literal definition of our name is we all feel dead inside and we're looking for something better. Dead America is alive, and it takes just a reaching out and connecting. The connection has been lost. We are witnessing chronic homelessness. And look at the streets of these cities, how filled up with tents and people bent over, shoving God knows what in their arms. That is the calling for each of us. And I started Dead America by going out talking to homeless people. I've witnessed homelessness myself. And when we are down in the basement like that, we need somebody to give us a ladder. And that's what that love and compassion of Christ is truly about. So we need ministries out there doing whatever they can to bring light to the darkness. And that's what we are here to do, is it not?
Yeah. You mentioned homelessness, right? And somewhere along the way, I'm not sure from whom I learned this, but I'm glad that I did. Someone gave me the simple advice that say, when you encounter a homeless person, right, we tend to do one of two things. Most of us, most of the time, we'll walk back and try not to look at them. And we'll just walk by as fast as we can or drive by and just ignore it. We don't want to think about it. Occasionally, we'll feel like, oh, I'm going to bestow something on this different kind of person, and we'll give them a bill of some sort, right? And that's as far as we go. Anyway, what I heard was rather than do that, when you encounter a homeless person, whether it's on the street or they walk up to your car at a traffic light, look at them and look them in the eyes and ask them what their name is and repeat their name back to them. And and ask them how they're doing. And when they tell you, care. I mean, don't fake it. Show empathy. And you don't have to know more than that. But in other words, try to connect with them at a human level. And just that is amazing because they don't have anybody who's connecting with them at that level. Now, you take that kind of an extreme version. I would suggest there's different versions of that operate at most levels of society, right? There's a lot of people who are around people all the time, and they may be very successful and they're hanging around successful people. But when you see how they interchange, they have relatively shallow conversations and they talk about work or sports or the weather, or when they think they're getting real vulnerable, they'll talk about something one of their kids does that makes them look like a good parent, right? That's about as deep as a lot of people go. They aren't connecting with real people about real life. So I would suggest that this concept of how we connect with each other, it operates in different forms at all levels, but whatever sphere is your world, assume that of all the people around you, most of them are struggling with something, and a half or more are struggling with something serious or are very close to someone who is, and they're probably not talking about it. And by you just being there for them and being interested and being real and being empathetic and listening, you can make a big difference on them. Just, one conversation at a time. What an incredible way to live when you think about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell and I've witnessed it myself that a lot of your homeless people are very happy because they have very little and they have a lot of friends. And that's very interesting to me when we break down the psychology and physiology of it. It's fascinating that all it takes is friends, and that brings community. And a lot of people overlook the simplicity of that. Why are they so happy and they'd rather be homeless than, in the system per se?
Yeah. Well, we allow ourselves to be deluded that happiness equals the most stuff or the most important job or people thinking how cool we are. That's what we strive for. Those are all, artificial and shallow. The things that matter is, A, do we connect with other people at a real level? B, do we try to understand ourselves so that we can take steps in the right direction? And when we screw up, when we fail, do we, rather than saying, I am a failure, we said, okay, that's a setback. I don't have to be that way tomorrow. And so we keep taking steps day to day. Hopefully, as much as we can, we keep moving in the right direction, and we try to connect with the people who are on a journey too. It's a whole different way of thinking about life rather than striving for something artificial and thinking that's going to make us something. You don't have to look far, right? You look a lot of people who, in the movies or on TV or whatever have made great amounts of money. And internally, they're very often empty and dissatisfied, because it's like, you put it in a business context, right? I talk to a lot of business people, right? They're climbing the ladder of success, and then they get to the top and they figure out, that ladder's leaning against the wrong building. There's nothing there. They've been all their life, or for 30 or 40 years, right? They've been chasing this elusive, when that happens, I'll be happy. When that promotion, or when I get that much money, or when those people give me that title, that doesn't give you satisfaction or contentment. It's okay to feel good about our accomplishments. That's fine, right? But it's how do we think about ourselves? How do we interact with other people? Are we doing things that are having an impact on the people in our domain? Are we trying to be better people a step at a time? That's actually much closer to what life is all about.
That's exactly right. I like it a lot, Steve. Is there anything else that people should recognize before we go? This flew by so quick.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. The other thing is, again, Steps is a nonprofit ministry, right? So we're just trying to help other people. We do a lot to help people prevent bad habits and addictions. We have just put out a new resource out there that's free. If anyone wants to go get it, they can find it at lifeimprovementsteps.com/prevention. lifeimprovementsteps.com/prevention. So again, you'll see short videos, easy to read articles, or you can listen to podcasts, and it can help you prevent bad habits or addictions or whatever you call them. So I hope that's available to anyone, and anyone just searching for resources overall can find them at the main website, lifeimprovementsteps.com.
All right. And is that where you want people to reach out to you at?
Yeah, that's the best place.
All right. Steve, it's been a fascinating discussion today. I thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and your understanding with people.
My pleasure. I love what you're doing, and it's a great cause. So I enjoyed it.
Amen. Thank you.
Cold linoleum floors, the hum of the fridge so low. A boy counts cracks in the ceiling where the shadows grow. Empty chair at the table, whiskey still on his breath, while the needle whispers promises of sweet forget. Midnight oil burns, yellow legal pads in stacks. Trembling hands trace redemption through the relapses. Each prison bar he broke became a rung to climb, turning his rock bottom into others' starting line. Sunday school flannel boards to stadium lights ablaze. His voice cracks when he speaks of those first sober days. Live streams glow in lonely rooms where parents pace the floor, till his words cut through the static like a lighthouse roar. You rose up, Steve, from ash and flame, built a kingdom from the pain. Leather-bound hope with dog-eared pages, blog posts shining through the ages. One next step, one prayer's night turns the darkness into light. From trailer park evictions to church basement pews, from court-ordered meetings to sold-out venue views. Every scar a roadmap, every tear a well, drawing water for the thirsty from the depths of hell. You rose up, Steve, from ash and flame, built a kingdom from the pain. Leather-bound hope with dog-eared pages, blog posts shining through the ages. One next step, one prayer's might turns the darkness into light. From holding cells to holding grandbabies tight, from pawn shop guitars to podcast mic, you mark the trail from shame's cold grip to morning coffee, grandkids' lips. One step sober kiss goodnight, one step a paycheck in the light, one step a Bible on the dash, one step breaking addiction's lash. One next step through the rain, one next step turns the pain